Bro, I genuinely need to know what Inumaki did to Gege. Because look at this man's life for like 5 seconds and tell me Gege wasn't personally beefing with him. This dude was born with a curse technique that basically means he can't talk normally. And not in the I'm quiet and mysterious type of way. No. If Inumaki casually walks up to you and says, "Good morning," bro might accidentally send you to the fucking afterlife. So instead, he has to communicate using rice ball ingredients. Salmon, tuna mayo, bonito flakes. Imagine waking up every morning knowing your vocabulary is basically a grocery list because your mouth is legally classified as a weapon. And honestly, that's already a terrible hand to be dealt. But then you actually look at what cursed speech does and realize Inumaki's technique is insanely dangerous. Because the whole idea is ridiculously simple. Inumaki says something and cursed energy forces the target to obey. He can tell somebody to stop, he can tell them to get crushed, he can tell them to run away, and if the opponent isn't strong enough to resist it, that's basically wraps. What makes Inumaki sound absolutely broken? Until Jujutsu Kaisen remembers that Gege has to actually let his characters fight people. Because cursed speech has one gigantic problem. The stronger the opponent, the harder Inumaki has to push his technique. And when he pushes it too far, guess who gets punished? Inumaki's throat. This man literally has a curse technique, where the recoil is basically congratulations, you successfully told the enemy to stop, coughing up blood. And that's where I start feeling bad for bro, because imagine having one of the coolest abilities in the entire series, and the downside is basically your fucking respiratory system. And the crazy thing is, Inumaki isn't even some useless character. People forget this because JJK has approximately 900 characters, whose entire purpose is to appear for 3 chapters and then get folded. But Inumaki actually has moments where his technique was incredibly useful. He's one of the first characters who makes cursed speech feel genuinely terrifying, because when he says something, you actually have to respect it. You can't just stand there thinking, yeah, whatever bro, because if your cursed energy isn't enough to resist him, Inumaki can literally turn your whole body against you. And that's what makes the whole Inumaki can't do shit against powerful enemies thing in the Reddit post so funny. Because that's not even really the point. His technique isn't weak. It's actually so dangerous that the story has to constantly put restrictions on it. You can't just walk into every fight and start saying, die, explode, delete yourself, because then we'd have a completely different fucking manga. Imagine Sukuna pulling up and Inumaki just goes, die, and Sukuna's like, bet, roll credits. So instead, cursed speech has to work within the power system. The stronger the opponent, the more resistance they can put up. And the more Inumaki forces the technique, the more his own body gets cooked. Which brings me to the part where I genuinely think Gege looked at this character and said, yeah, he suffered enough, because Shibuya happened, and if you've forgotten what happens to Inumaki during Shibuya, well, you know that gigantic fucking disaster Sukuna created? Yeah. Inumaki was caught in that shit. Sukuna opens Malevolent Shrine and starts turning Shibuya into a fucking blender, and Inumaki loses an arm. Bro wasn't even fighting Sukuna. He wasn't getting a dramatic one-on-one. He wasn't standing there screaming some final attack. He basically just got caught. And the consequences of Sukuna existing in the same neighborhood. That's crazy. Imagine your biggest enemy isn't even your enemy. It's just the weather forecast. What's happening today? 70% chance of Sukuna. Damn. And then there's another layer to this. Inumaki's entire technique revolves around his voice. His throat is already one of the biggest limitations on his ability. So Gege gives this dude a curse technique that can destroy his throat. Then eventually has him lose an arm. And people still look at him and go, yeah, but he's kind of irrelevant. Bro, he can't even speak. What more do you want from him? And this is where the Reddit comment saying, poor bastard can't even stub his toe without having to watch his mouth, actually gets me. Because that's basically his entire existence. Inumaki can't casually shit talk somebody. He can't yell when he's angry. He can't scream during the fight without thinking about what words he's using. He can't just lose his temper and start talking normally. His own fucking voice is a loaded gun. That's such a ridiculous character concept when you actually think about it. And honestly, I think that's why people like Inumaki, despite him not having nearly as much screen time as characters like Yuji, Megumi, or Nobara. He's just the little goober. He's walking around saying salmon and Tsunameo while everybody else is dealing with generational trauma. And then the moment he actually gets serious, you're reminded, oh shit, this dude can literally force people to obey him. That's a great ability, but JJK has another problem, power scaling. Because eventually the story gets to a point where everybody's fighting some demonic bullshit that has enough cursed energy to power a small country. And suddenly Inumaki's technique becomes harder and harder to use effectively. Because imagine trying to command someone like Sukuna. You say, stop. Sukuna says, your throat. And honestly, that's probably one of the biggest reasons Inumaki feels like he got drugged. His ability is incredibly strong against the right opponent. But JJK keeps introducing opponents who are basically the wrong fucking opponent. You can't have Inumaki walking around deleting special grades every Tuesday. So Gege basically had to put him in a situation where his biggest strength couldn't completely break the story. And then there's the funniest part. Nobody even slanders him. That's what that Reddit comment is saying. Because apparently, you have to be relevant enough to get slandered first. And honestly, that's kind of true. Look at the JJK fandom. We have entire wars over Gojo. Sukuna fans and Gojo fans have been fighting since the fucking dinosaurs. Megumi gets slandered every other business day. Yuji gets called every name known to mankind depending on which chapter we're discussing. Nobara has people writing entire essays about whether she's unrelated. But Inumaki, bro is so beloved that people barely even bother insulting him. You can't slander Inumaki. That's like bullying a puppy. Someone will say Inumaki is useless, and another person immediately appears like, delete this, that's my goat. Don't speak about him. We love Inumaki. And honestly, I get it. Because the man has already been through enough. He lost an arm, his cursed technique damages his throat. He has to communicate using food. His actual combat options gets more limited against stronger opponents. And then the manga basically puts him on the bench while everybody else is participating in increasingly insane fights. Meanwhile, bro is somewhere in the background like Salmon. And what's crazy is that his character design makes the whole thing even funnier. This dude looks like he should be the most mysterious character in the entire series. White hair, high collar, serious eyes, quiet personality. You look at him and think, yeah, this guy definitely has some dark, mysterious backstory. And he opens his mouth and says, Tsunameo. Imagine being a first-year student at Jujutsu High and your new classmate introduces himself like, hey, I'm Inumaki. And you're like, oh, nice to meet you. Then he says, Salmon. And you're just standing there like, thanks? But underneath the jokes, I actually think Inumaki is one of those characters where the concept is way more interesting than the amount of story Gege gave him. Because cursed speech has so many possibilities. Think about how terrifying Inumaki would be if the story gave him more opportunities to develop his technique. Not necessarily by just making him stronger, but by making him smarter with it. Because the ability doesn't always have to be, go kill yourself. He could manipulate fights with small commands, interrupt attacks, create openings, force positioning, disrupt an opponent rhythm, coordinate with teammates. And we've already seen that cursed speech can be incredibly useful when used creatively. The problem is that eventually the story becomes so fucking violent that everybody's throwing around abilities that makes Inumaki's technique look less impressive by comparison. And that's honestly the biggest tragedy. He didn't get a bad cursed technique. He got a cursed technique that belongs in a series where everyone eventually becomes fucking insane. Early JJK Inumaki, terrifying. Early JJK, okay bro, please don't hurt your throat. And that's why I don't think Gege necessarily hated Inumaki. I think something even worse happened. Gege created a character people actually wanted more of, and then kept finding reasons not to give him more. Because whenever Inumaki appears, people immediately remember why they like him. He's funny, his ability is unique, his design is recognizable, he's actually useful. And he's got that perfect combination of being ridiculously powerful in theory while also being hilariously handicapped by the rules of his own ability. But because of giving us, but instead of giving us more Inumaki, Gege gave us suffering. Arm gone, throw problems, limited dialogue, limited fights, limited screen time. Bro's character development is basically a terms and condition agreement. And somehow, we still love him. That's probably the funniest part. Because the Reddit post says, Gege really hated this guy. And everybody in the comments is basically responding, nah, we love this little dude. And I think that's the perfect ending for Inumaki. Because maybe Gege did nerf him. Maybe he did get robbed. Maybe Kurt's speed could have been explored way more. Maybe Inumaki deserved an actual major fight where he gets to show what his technique can really do. But at the end of the day, the fact that JJK fans still defend this man this hard after everything is probably the biggest proof that Gege accidentally made a character people were never going to stop loving.